Thank you so much, Steve, and for sharing this vision that your founder and your CEO has for the words that you had on there, which are very much aligned with what we see in our research in terms of enabling people to do their best work, imagining a future where everybody could bring their skills and talents to the table and to organizations to actually accomplish that vision of doing their best work and fulfilling their potential. So with that, I'll just make a quick note on explaining my accent in case you're wondering. I'm from Austria originally, if you're wondering about where I'm from. So now you can listen to actually what I have to say without having to wonder about that. So now agenda today, we're going to talk a little bit about what's changing in the world of work today, what impacts and what disruptors we see in the world of work. Then we'll talk about a framework to build the workforce of the future. And then Henry is going to talk about a case study of Conagra Brands, what they have done to apply these practices and these changes. And then we'll talk a little bit about next steps, and then we'll have some time to answer your questions. So if you have any questions in the meantime, just type it into the questions box, and we will be able to answer them. So with that, Mike, over to you, and are you going to talk about what's changing in the world of work?
Sure. Thanks so much, Kathy, and Steve for teeing us up so well. So thinking about the new world of work, the future is here and now. So when you think about the future, what's the first thing that comes to mind? You know, perhaps it's AI up there in the upper left corner. You see Watson beating the best Jeopardy players in the world, and they're not happy about it. Perhaps it's robotics or self-driving cars or virtual reality. Perhaps it's drones or how the transportation industry is shifting. You know, we take a look at the wheelchair, and technology is enabling people to do things that they've never done before, and to design new things with agility through things like 3D printing. The point is that the future is here and now, and for the most part, the things that come to mind when we think about the future, they're already around us. And this is because work is changing rapidly. There's unprecedented change and opportunity that impact the way that we work. And we see 7 clear disruptors that are changing the way work is done. 3 of them have to do with technology, and the other 4 are really about people and their jobs. So the first one is, you know, clearly technology is everywhere, and its adoption is exponential. More than 6 billion people will have smartphones by next year. So that's 6 billion people across the world that will have immediate access to the internet and to each other. We see AI, cognitive computing, and robotics. In 2008, it would cost a company, on average, $500,000 to institute these technologies into their business. And today, it only costs $22,000 on average. So it's getting a lot cheaper and a lot easier to incorporate these advanced technologies. We see the tsunami of data. In the last 2 years, 9 times more data has been generated than what was available in the entire history of mankind. There's just a wave of data, and everyone's trying to figure out how to put this data to work. And we see that jobs are vulnerable to automation. This is where we hear all these fears that automation is going to replace jobs. But we do know through research that in the UK, 35% of jobs are vulnerable to be replaced by automation. That's 47% in the US, and even 70% or 77% in China. And we'll address this a little more later. When we think about diversity and generational change, we know that there are 5 generations currently in the workforce. So millennials make up about 50% right now. But what's interesting is the segment that's showing the most growth are those that are 55 and older. It's these folks that are retired, they're choosing to stay at work, or they're choosing to return to work. So we have all these different generations at work that we can potentially take advantage of. There's also an explosion in the contingent workforce. So by next year, 40% of self-employment. That's things like contract, gig work, freelancing. And then lastly, just the nature of jobs or the nature of careers is shifting. So gone are the days when people can lean on what they learned in college or the skills that they gained early in their career and use those for their entire career. We have a half-life of skills is 2.5 to 5 years. And additionally, that the average tenure in one job is less than 5 years. We now know that the number one reason people leave their jobs is it's not their leader, it's because of a lack of learning and growth opportunities. And despite all these changes, workforce productivity has remained stagnant. Technology is expanding at this exponential rate, but the productivity of our workforce is pretty much flat. And this is because businesses have yet to realize kind of this broken promise that technology will drive productivity. This is a gap or an opportunity that we call business performance potential. As an individual, I'm constantly using new technology. Every week there's a new app on my smartphone, or my wife is finding some kind of gadget that makes our lives easier or more enjoyable. But businesses they're not keeping pace. They're not adopting new technologies as quickly as individuals. And public policy is even further behind in terms of defining how businesses are or how they should adopt technology. A great example that I think of is the alternative workforce, the gig workers, the folks like Uber and Lyft drivers. Technology is a huge driver of this workforce, but there's still no easy to understand definition from the public sector of an alternative worker, let alone policy on how organizations should work with them. So it's left up to companies to figure out how to do that.
Thanks, Mike. So lots of change, lots of opportunity, and how does this impact how we think about work and the workforce? These are some actual quotes that we wanted to share with you that we heard from clients that we're working with across industries, across geographies, big companies, mid-sized companies, small companies. Really, everybody is asking themselves these questions, and the questions have to do with on the upper right, left-hand side. You hear us thinking about, hear leaders thinking about, how do we balance this short-term efficiency mindset of just meeting your quarterly, maybe profit goals or P&L goals, to really thinking 2 or 5 years ahead and thinking about how we leverage these new technologies and all these new opportunities to create growth for the organization. So how do you balance short-term mindset with the long-term mindset? How do we help people be more productive and add more value? Because it seems to be that we have a promise that with all these new technologies, we'll be working so much more efficiently, be so much more engaged, but it hasn't happened yet. It hasn't really happened yet. We're more stressed and maybe less focused and less efficient and less engaged and less productive because we're overwhelmed. I just heard a statistic that in the last 10 years, the American workforce has lost an entire week of vacation time or PTO time. And it's not because they don't have it. It's because they can't take it. Because you come back from like a week off and then you have like 5,000 emails and you have to respond to all of them. And we've all been there, right? And so all of these new technologies don't really help us work more productively. So do we need to change the paradigm? How do we even think about work itself? It shouldn't really matter where you are physically or what time it is for you or how you're connecting with others, as long as you're productive and adding value. So how can we leverage that across the globe, accessing that talent? Because we heard, and I think we see that every day in our work, and you see it every day in your work, there's a talent gap, right? It's very hard to find talent and to find the right people to work for you. And once they're here, they only stay here maybe for a short term. We just heard like 4.5 years is the average tenure in a job. So how can we help broaden that talent spectrum? And I love the quote on the upper right-hand side where we talk about somebody talks about a perfect storm right now, because it's a storm, but it's also kind of perfect because it's up to us to really take advantage of these opportunities and get in front of them, not just react to them, but lead in the industry. And so all these industries are transforming, and our customers are looking for different things from us. And what does this mean for how we work collectively across the organization and even outside of the organization to get customers what they need and what they're looking for? And then what does working remotely, for example, what does it mean for managers and individuals? How do they need to collaborate differently, and how do they need to engage differently? How can we help them change their approach so it's not just a butt in seats kind of approach, but how they manage their own work and work of their teams in a different way as we collaborate across geographies. So all of these questions, and I'm sure some of them sounded familiar to you, make us think about a new approach to talent. So we used to think about talent management, and I've been working in talent management for the last 20 years. We always thought about integration, right? So how can we integrate these silos, whether that's talent acquisition or learning and development or retention or performance management or rewards? How do we integrate these different siloed processes and make them more one thing? So we always talked about talent management. What we see now with the future of work, it really makes us think about a different approach to that. And we like to think about the next generation of talent management is workforce transformation. So let me decompose that a little bit for you. So talent to workforce. When you think about talent, talent is oftentimes used kind of exclusively, meaning talent might be your leaders, it might be definitely your internal workforce, those employees that are in your payroll. When you think about the workforce, it's anybody who does work for you, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means, this like broader spectrum of talent. And then we think not just management, how you integrate these silos, but transform work and the workforce to really take advantage of all of these opportunities and get ahead of the change rather than be reacting to it. So we think about, instead of attracting, developing, retaining, managing, and rewarding talent in the talent management paradigm on the left-hand side, we really think about how do you access skills, how do you curate engaging experiences, and then how do you engage the workforce of the future to take advantage of the opportunities posed by the future of work.
Yeah, I love that, Kathy. And one of the things we want to get into is how do we bring it together? We talk about this workforce transformation, but how do we start transforming, or where do we start? So I'm sure you've heard it before, but we'll say it again. You want to start with the end in mind. So really, what are the outcomes that you're trying to accomplish? And we think about outcomes in three ways. So I'm going to talk about cost, value, and meaning, with three stakeholders in mind. So the customer, the workforce, and then the organization or the business. Now right here I've shown the cost, and most organizations are really focused in this area. They're focused on things like productivity, efficiency, profit, revenue. Those are the things that you'd see in the lower left-hand corner here where we talk about cost reduction, saving money, making money. But the inputs to those are certainly the customers, and where the customers think about cost really comes down to price. We're not even getting to value yet. It's just how much money does it cost and how much do I have? But for the workforce, it's all about the cost of labor. So what does it take to produce goods and services, or what we would call throughput? But we propose that there's untapped potential in working both vertically as well as horizontally, and considering a lot more than cost, but value and meaning. So let me talk a little bit about what value is, and this is where, for customers, it is that balance between the price and the value that I'm getting. So it's about providing something appealing, something maybe they didn't even know they needed when you really get into value and growth. So I think about smartphones 10 years ago versus today. We didn't even know that we needed these computers that we're attached to. But people are addicted now, and this is where organizations seek to find that sweet spot. If we think about workers, value is about their development and their career. And as an example, I can think about an organization that adopts a new technology. And as a result, maybe this is a technology that helps with some back office functions, repeatable tasks. They're able to reduce their headcount and save a lot of money. So that's an organization that's really only focused on cost and not considering value or growth. But consider that the same organization that adopts the same technology, and rather than reducing headcounts, they actually reskill their workers. So rather than workers doing a bunch of repetitive tasks and back office, they take those workers and now they focus them on the customer relationship. That's an organization that's focused on value. And they're providing value not just to their customers by thinking about their offering and their relationship, but they're providing value to their workers, providing them with development and career. And this is how you grow a business. That's what value is about. It's about growth. And the last thing is really about meaning. And that's about impact or connecting the work that we do in an organization back to a deeper understanding of the stakeholders, of the customer, of the workforce, of the business. So for customers, it's about, doing something more than just providing something appealing or a smartphone. It's helping them achieve their aspirations, their life's goals, things like that. That's kind of the holy grail for any product or service. For the workforce, it's about providing a sense of purpose and meaning. And we hear that all the time, but there really is some business in that. So Wharton management professor Adam Grant did a study, and he found that when employees had the opportunity to just spend some time learning about how what they do every day impacts customers, those employees were 171% more productive. 171%, just because they had a better understanding of what they did and how that provided value. And meaning for the business is about providing purpose beyond the organization. So our Human Capital Trends report from Burson and Deloitte really talks about what we call the social enterprise. And it's looking about how organizations combine cost and growth with meaning as a business strategy. So we think about corporate citizenship. That's a good example. And it really is a business strategy. It's not just a feel-good strategy. So I look at the example of Patagonia, the outdoor clothing company, who recently went public and contributed $10 million that they got in new tax deduction to environmental protection groups. Consider the impact of that, not just from a PR and a brand message, but they're an outdoor clothing group. They're investing in the outdoors for sustainability, but they're doing something broader. And I think about the converse. If companies are not focused on how what they're doing is having a social impact, they're experiencing negative effect. Millennials are certainly very concerned with social issues, and research is finding that they're putting their money where their values are. So companies who are not thinking about providing meaning in any way are going to start to feel the effects if they haven't already. Kathy, do you want to talk a little bit more about some of these fundamental dimensions?
Yes, yeah, thank you, Mike. And I love that we start with the outcomes and start with the end in mind, because that's really something that changes your mindset. If you're not just focused on cost cutting and this downward spiral of getting done more with less, but really then it's less with less, because you keep cutting, and by the time you're done cutting, there's really nothing left for the customer and for the workforce to enjoy and to take advantage of. So how you get started in terms of redesigning work and the workforce. So first element that you need to rethink is the work itself. So start with the work itself. What is the nature of the work? How does the nature of work, job, skills, and capabilities change in this new world where we have machines and people working together side by side? And we like to think about augmentation, not automation. So when Mike talked before about how many jobs might be susceptible for for replacement, we really think about it in a different way, not replacing jobs, but augmenting work and helping people focus on the more human skills and having technology, AI, cognitive, those kind of technologies do the things that machines are best at, which is the repeatable and the predictable, and have people focus on what people are best at, which is forward thinking and innovation and emotional intelligence and communication and teamwork and all of those kind of things that machines can't do yet. So the work, we'll start with the work. Then you'll need to focus on the workforce. So who are the people and machines that will do the work, and how can you broaden that talent pool, that constrained talent pool that even Steve talked about in the beginning, how the talent pool is getting tighter and tighter. How can we broaden that talent pool beyond just the balance sheet employees? So when we say balance sheet employees, these are literally the people that are on your payroll. But there's other people that could do work for you in a different employment setting or in different work setting. How do we broaden that, and how do we create a sense of inclusion and belonging across all of these employment scenarios? We like to think about that as the workforce ecosystem. And then the last dimension that we want to consider is the workplace. And that's actually the dimension that most organizations are not really all that focused on yet. But we see this coming as a really important consideration as well. Where can work get done? And the where is both the physical and the digital workplace that people need to do their best work. We'd like to think about that in the context or in the mindset of global collaboration. So both collaboration and global is important. And how do we create these workplaces, both physical and digital, for people to do their best work together and accomplish that broader meaning, both for their own work and for the organization and for the customers that Mike talked about. And we like to think about all of these together. So you can't really do just one of them. If you just think about the work, you have to think about also what that means for the workforce and what that means for the workplace. And so that's why we see these connecting arrows between all of these. So let's decompose these a little bit, and let's start talking about the workforce, or start talking about building for the future across the workforce ecosystem. And you see on the right-hand side this kind of spectrum of employee workers, I should say, from your organization's employees, that's the people on your payroll or on your balance sheet, all the way over joint venture employees, contractors, consultants, even gig workers, and even the crowd. And gig workers, Mike mentioned before, like the Ubers and Lyfts and Airbnbs, but gig work is really being up-leveled too, and you get gig lawyers now and gig consultants and all of that. So the skills that you could get from gig workers, certainly in the last years, have really increased and broadened. And you see some statistics here. I'm not going to go through all of them, but you see that a lot of people are looking for a side hustle, and that's not just, again, frontline workers. I just read a statistic that even executive level people still looking for a side hustle. So more than half of the people look for a side hustle. They want to do different work in addition to their maybe day job. The next two statistics are from our Global Human Capital Trends reports that we just launched, where we looked at over 10,000 organizations across the world and across industries, and we see that the alternative workforce, that ecosystem of workers, is important to many of them, but yet hardly anybody, less than 10%, have mature processes for the alternative workforce. And when we think about what are mature processes, it starts with even knowing how many you have. And even that is a hard question for many organizations. How many alternative workers do you have in your organizations, and what kind of work do they do, and what are the skills that they have, and how long do you have them, and what are they contributing to? So when you think about this alternative workforce or this workforce ecosystem, you really need to think about many different facets of that. You got to think about what teams are they working on, what are the work groups that are working on, what skills and capabilities and mindsets do they have that they can bring to the table? And Mike, if you could maybe, yeah, click through a little bit. Yeah, that's great. So what are the skills and mindset? What roles do they play in? What segments? What's the workforce segments? And then the last two, the workforce experience. What's the experience that we're creating for them? And how do we make sure that they all feel included and that we bring that diverse skill set to the table and really make the best out of it? So not just having a diverse workforce, but how do we include all of these different mindsets and capabilities? So that's the way that we like to think about the workforce, like of this three-legged stool. So how can I leverage the open workforce economy? That's the first question we want to that organizations need to ask themselves. How can you really leverage that open workforce economy to the best of your organization? The next area that we want to touch on is the work segment. So we talk about this concept of super jobs, and super jobs, it's a concept that we introduced in a Human Capital Trends report that we just launched, where we think about jobs that didn't used to be one job that now combine different parts of jobs into a kind of a new job, and also combine technology into that. One example that I'd like to bring is a New York-based financial services firm. Of course, they have investment advisors, and usually these investment advisors would advise their clients on stock performance and future potential of stock growth and investment growth in general. And a lot of this is now supported with technology. So these predictive models can do what people had to do in the past manually. And what this financial services company now is doing is they put into this job of the investment advisor a component of career coaching, because a client's future wealth is also impacted by their future career, of course. So bringing technology to the table to do these modeling and scenarios, but then adding another component to that to really satisfy and the needs of their customers and create something meaningful for their customers for needs that they didn't even didn't even know they existed or had. So how can we help humans and machines collaborate rather than machines replacing people? That's the work question that we want to pose. And then the last leg of that stool was the workplace. So how do you create this collaboration environment, both from a physical interaction, so person-to-person interaction? So what kind of work lends itself most to a physical interaction? What kind of work lends itself most to a physical and virtual interaction? And what kind of work lends itself best to a virtual and virtual interaction? And how do you create and provide the tools and infrastructure for people to seamlessly collaborate across all of these boundaries? So how can we balance flexibility, culture, and teamwork with this need to be distributed across the globe? And how does this relate back to the work and to the workforce again? So these are the three areas that need to be transformed as you think about the future of work and the workforce.
Yeah, I love this, Kathy, and I love the deep dive that you provided, but really the questions that you posed and around the workforce, and the workplace. How do we balance flexibility, culture, and teamwork when we think about the workplace? So we've talked a lot about, why this is important and what goes into it, but let's talk a little bit more about really how you go about some workforce transformation. So we have, 3 iterative steps: Imagine, Compose, and Activate. So Imagine is about creating a plan or creating a vision. Compose is about creating a strategy or creating a plan, that is. And Activate is really about how you execute on that plan. So I'll start here with Imagine. It's about putting aside all the preconceived assumptions, not considering all the barriers and the what ifs and the why we can't, and envisioning new possibilities of the workforce, and the workplace. And so within this area, we really see 3 major opportunities to focus on. Kathy, you talked a little bit about digital transformation, how to integrate technology into work. What I see is the good news is that HR, generally as a function, has really stepped up to lead this. And HR is integrating digital technology into our systems and processes before other functions in the workforce. So we're being a leader, but we're also being tasked to help the entire enterprise with digital transformation. We think about alternative talent models, and Kathy, you showed that great model from salaried workers, all the way out to crowdsourcing. But how do organizations strategically leverage an alternative workforce? Essentially to put the right people in the right place when it's needed most to get results. One example that comes to mind is this German company, Bosch. So what they did is they created a subsidiary, but the subsidiary was made up entirely of a contingent workforce. It was its on-call retirees and former employees, 1,700 former employees and retirees that they basically had on call as senior expert to work on and consult on projects as an as-needed basis, which is pretty awesome because they were able to provide value. They put the right work, the right talent where they needed, but they also helped the workforce, the younger folks, learn from them. So it provided meaning to these people that were retired, provided some growth and learning from some of the new workforce. So that was an example of Bosch providing and really leveraging this alternative workforce model. And as well, there's human-machine collaboration, and Kathy hit on that. And we talked a little bit about rather than replacing the workforce, technology, it brings opportunity to provide greater value and growth for the workforce. So we talk about the super jobs and things like that, but it's really about using technology to provide significant gains in efficiency by pairing it with people and getting more productivity out of technology than what the technology could provide alone. There's always going to be this human factor in the workplace. I mean, that's what keeps companies growing, adapting, and sustainable. The point is, how do we identify and harness that human factor to work alongside machines? So the second area here is compose, and it's really about creating that plan once you've created a vision and imagined some options. And the first area is really around work design, and that's about redesigning work to allow for technology as well as flexibility and agility. So this is where we think about work and how that's shifting from process-based to project-based, and how it's focused less on individuals and more on teams solving problems. Workforce planning is really about determining how to leverage the alternative workforce for current needs, as well as sort of anticipating future trends and future needs that you'll have, both for your alternative workforce, but your entire workforce. And then workplace outcomes is really about, again, the war for talent. Organizations are trying to access this global talent pool. They're trying to get the contemporary, the new skills. We talked about the half-life. And to do this, they've got to rethink workplace options to be able to access the global talent pool. So it's really, the workplace in three ways. How do people collaborate? Is it synchronous? Is it asynchronous? What resources, systems, and other people does each worker need access to? How is the organization going to provide that access? And then what's the physical and virtual infrastructure that you've got to support expansion of workplace options? And then lastly, activating is really about the execution of workforce transformation. So workforce transformation is not intended to be a one-time thing where you just imagine, compose, activate, and you're done. You should reimagine and recompose and reactivate. Organizations need to think about this as continuous, because we need to continuously adapt to rapidly changing environments, some of those disruptors that I talked about earlier. And so we really need to move away from this attract, develop, retain model and think more about access, curate, and engage. And Kathy mentioned those a little bit before. Access is about accessing the right talent and skills where and when they're needed. So it aligns with kind of sourcing, acquisition, mobility practices that we think about in terms of talent management. Curate is about creating experiences and relationships and growing skills and capabilities. So that aligns with things like learning, leadership development, career management. And then engaging is really about motivating and supporting employees to utilize their skills to the best of their abilities. Really what Eightfold is all about is helping people realize their potential. And that aligns with performance and coaching as well as rewards and well-being. And so workforce transformation or continuous workforce transformation is how we need to start thinking about talent management. And we see this model eventually replacing the traditional talent management model. And the reason is we need to start thinking about our workforce more holistically and further upstream, because today's talent management practices are still siloed and they're not really helping organizations anticipate and adapt to new pressures. So as you're doing this, there's clearly some enablers that can either help you or accelerate workforce transformation efforts, or they can inhibit that. So the three big ones that we see are technology and tools, and we've talked a lot about implementing technology for growth, not just as efficiency. But the biggest factor here with technology and tools is that you're implementing with a purpose, not just putting in the newest technology for technology's sake or because it's best practice, but it's clearly aligned with your business strategy. Analytics and sensing is about gathering the right data from the right people at the right time. So we think about customers, workers, and the business or stakeholders. And it's really about correctly identifying and understanding pressures and changes, and then making the right strategic moves to anticipate and adapt the workforce to those pressures. And then the other one is culture and leadership. So culture can be as strong a barrier as it is an enabler. So you're thinking about an organization that may be resistant to change, that's very hierarchical and authority-driven. Those are the types of cultures that impede transformation efforts. But on the contrary, if you've got an environment that supports innovation and experimentation, that sees challenges as new opportunities, or you've got one where teams are supporting each other and learning from each other, this is the kind of culture that enables workforce transformation. And culture and all of this is driven by leadership. So HR can kind of be a driver and supporter of culture, but leaders really determine it. It's ultimately the leaders that determine and drive culture. So that's why we have those grouped together.